Welcome to our second lesson, the guided notes, and today's topic is unit rate. So let's read through the definition. A unit rate. So let's go ahead and write that in. Unit rate describes how many units of the first type of quantity corresponds to 1 unit of the second type of quantity. So let's look at some examples. So here are some words and phrases that are going to indicate that we're being asked to find a unit rate. So this one talks about how many miles. That's the first quantity. A car can travel per hour. And I want you to highlight or circle per or write that word per down. That is a good indication that we're asking about 1 hour. The next phrase says how much was earned. So we're looking, the first quantity is money for each week. So in this case, each, the word each is implying one week. The next phrase says how much sugar does it take to make a cake? And this little word is really easy to miss. When they say a cake, they're referring to 1 cake. So the first quantity would be sugar, and the second quantity, 1 cake. So the final way, or not that this is not the only way, but sometimes they actually say find the unit rate. They say directly find the unit rate. And that also is a very good indication that they're talking about 1 when they say unit. However, to be honest, sometimes that's not as helpful because they don't necessarily list the quantity we're trying to find 1 of. So let's begin. Let's see what it asks us to do. We can accomplish finding the unit rate by using 2 different methods. So let's use the following problem to model this. And remember, at the end, we want to be sure to answer the question. So let's read through the question. A skydiver falls 140 feet in 4 seconds. How far does the skydiver fall per second? So let's go ahead and highlight our box, whichever you prefer, some information in here. The first information that they gave us was that a skydiver falls 140 feet in 4 seconds. So right there, they're giving us a ratio to set up. Next important bit of information is how far does the skydiver fall per second? So we immediately can recognize that word per, which means 1 second. And how far is talking about distance. And so we want to refer to our distance because it was given in feet. It didn't say miles, it said feet. So based on what we did in the last problem, let's start by defining the variable. So this is step 1. We're going to let x, and we could choose a different variable, but I'm going to use x, represent the number of feet. When they said how far, we're referring to feet. So now if you recall in our previous lesson, the second step when we're trying to work on these problems is to set up a proportion. And this is the method that we worked on last problem. This is how we're going to work on it, this first method. So we're going to take 144 feet, I'm going to label, and they gave us 4 seconds. And to find the second ratio, that's where our mystery is. It says how far, and remember x equals feet, so we don't know how many feet. But when we say per second, that means we're talking about 1 second. So that's our second step. The third step is where we cross multiply. And my preferred way to do this is to just move the labels out of the way while I'm doing the math. If you want to go ahead and use what you have up above, that's fine. I also prefer to start with where the variable is. So 4 times x is 4x. This reminds us to drop our equal. And 144 times 1, or anything times 1, is what you started with. So 144. Next, we're going to solve by dividing by 4. Dividing by 4. And we get our answer of x equals, if you want to pause to use a calculator, that's great. That answer is 36. Now, the wonderful thing about a proportion is I can now look back up and see what x was all about, and x was about feet. So now I know that my 36 is referring to feet. So 36 feet. Now let's try the second method. And for both of them, we'll wait till the very end to answer the question, which we basically already have. You're going to notice that method 2 refers to a shortcut. And so I want you to notice what they gave us right from the beginning. The information they gave us right at the onset of this problem was that we had 144 feet in 4 seconds. So I'm going to write 144 feet. I'm going to go ahead and use my labels in 4 seconds. And if you recall, if I have this little bar right here, it's not only a ratio bar or a fraction bar, it also means division. And if you look at the proportion method, didn't I just, after all this work, get right back to this right here? This means 144 divided by 4. And if I write it this way, and I use that as division, meaning 144 divided by 4, which is what we did here to get 136 feet when we solved, we're going to get that same answer. So we can kind of cut to the chase, so to speak, and just use the initial ratio that they gave us. The only problem with this method is now we have to go back and figure out what this 36 is. And there's 2 ways to do that. First of all, it is very helpful when you define a variable, because now I know what I just found or what I was looking for is the number of feet. So that's one way. If I use this method and don't define a variable, then what I'm finding is the first quantity for one of the second quantity. So unit rate is the first quantity, how many of the first quantity, in this case it's feet, for one of the second quantity. So now 36 must be talking about feet. So our final answer, and this is what I usually like students to do, is to go ahead and make it very clear what this answer means. So we were asked, how far does the skydiver fall per second? So we're going to answer the skydiver falls 36 feet per second. All right. So now let's move on to the second problem. So let's read through it. A pump moves 42 gallons in 14 minutes. Find the unit rate. So the question, we always want to figure out what we're being asked to find. You'll notice the question is asking us to find the unit rate. So that's nice. However, that means the amount of the first quantity for one of the second quantity. So we're going to have to do a little bit of work to figure out what they're asking us. So the first quantity that they mentioned is gallons. So we need to know how many of those for one quantity of the second. And so that's minutes. So let's go ahead and define a variable. No matter which method we use, we want to talk about the variable. So we're going to let our unknown x equal the number of gallons. Remember, unit rate means the amount of the first, in this case it's gallons, for one of the second. So we're trying to find the number of gallons per minute. Actually, sometimes it's nicer when they say something like per week or per minute our per whatever it happens to be, or for each, because it makes it a little bit more clear what we're being asked to find. So let's use our first method, the proportion method. So we would be asked to set up this proportion, 42, and remember your labels, 14 minutes. So this is what they gave us. So now when they say unit rate, we have to know that that means I'm trying to figure out the number of gallons, the first item, for one of the second item, and in this case it's minutes. If you're going to use the shortcut, you would just take 42 gallons and 14 minutes. You still want to label if you're going to use this method. So this would be the second step. The third step to solving this would be to go ahead and cross multiply. So if you're using the proportion method, you're going to cross multiply 14x equals 42 times 1 is 42. And then we want to solve this. So we're going to divide by 14 and divide by 14. Remember, this means not only fraction bar, it means division. So x equals 3. Now if I use the proportion method, I can clearly go up and look and see, okay, I've already told myself that x is gallons. So this is 3 gallons. I want you to notice the shortcut method comes from this. This is our solving step, and it's exactly like what we see here. So if we know that when we set this up for the shortcut that this really means 42 divided by 14, whatever answer we get is what we're looking for, but we now have to figure out what we're going to label it. So again, 2 ways to do that. If you define your variable, which I would suggest, you can immediately say, okay, that's the number of gallons, so you know that this is 3 gallons. If you don't define a variable, you have to recall that we're finding the first, how many of the first item they give us for one of the second. So this is 3 gallons. So the final step when we're trying to answer a question, particularly when it's a word problem, we want to go ahead and say, okay, the unit rate is 3 gallons, whoops, it should be an O, per minute, or you could say for 1 minute. All right, please move forward and try the unit rate practice problems. There are 3 of them, and you can choose either method, either the proportion method or the shortcut method, whichever seems to work best for you.